one thing that I wanted to mention is that a lot of your work is on Google Scholar. So if people uh, go to Google Scholar and they just search Dr. Andrea Kitta, Kitta, they'll find your work. They'll find a lot of it, and I would suggest that they do that and read it because I think they'll really enjoy it. Um,
Thank you.
Also, something really interesting. You just published a book,
I
so
did, yes.
and I will tweet about this. Maybe you could tell us about it.
Sure. Yeah, so I just published a book. It's called The Kiss of Death, and it's about contamination and contagion in folklore. And I really kind of I do a lot of different topics in it. It's all about contagion and contamination, but I look at everything from like the concept of a patient zero and super spreaders, and then I look at Slenderman and cyberbullying. I also have a chapter on the HPV vaccine, and then also talk about vampires and zombies and popular culture. So I talk about a lot of different things in the book, and they do all come together, I hope. But yeah, I'm really fascinated in how we talk about things being contaminated and contagious, and what we mean when we say those things. And the supernatural is something that we definitely think of as being contagious.
Mhm.
That if you pay attention to it, it will pay attention back to you, or you can spread it, or you can you can kind of make it go viral in a lot of different ways. And I find that really, really fascinating that we've chosen to use those words to talk about even supernatural experiences, which of course, are not medical in any sort of way, although they can be. So yeah, it's a really interesting kind of idea behind it to think about the supernatural as contagious. And one of the things I talk about in it is there was a sort of idea of Slender Man being contagious.
Mhm.
If you pay attention to him, he will contaminate you, and he will haunt you, and he will come after you. But that also there's some linking to that, and sort of concepts of suicide spirits, especially in some areas of Native American folklore. And that there was that at least the younger people in the communities were making that connection between more traditional ideas of these suicide spirits. The people who were in the community, the young people in the community, were making that connection with Slender Man. And that was interesting to kind of hear them talk about it. And I found some forums online where they were talking about it, and other places where they're making this connection. And so that was really interesting too, because that gave them a different language to talk about something that was perceived as even being older there. But it also gets into how suicide is considered to be contagious. So that when you tend to see that happening in groups, where you have one person who might die by suicide or attempt suicide, and then sometimes other people will also follow in that, and that's a real problem. That's something that's discussed a lot in literature about death by suicide. So it's really interesting and complicated to think of this as even a different way of talking about that. I mean, a different way of sort of acknowledging that this is a problem. So yeah, all the different ways that we kind of talk about how things are contagious is really interesting, both from a supernatural perspective, but also just kind of generally as a folklorist. And it's certainly, of course, very relevant, right now,
Mhm.
with COVID-19. And I find that fascinating too, because there's still so much we don't know about the virus itself. We're still learning so much about it. But this notion of contagion and contamination is so just foremost in our mind right now, because it's affecting literally every decision we make right now. Like, what is safe, what is unsafe, what do we consider to be acceptable risk versus unacceptable risk? And even down to people who don't believe that it's even real. So
Mhm.
we also have a lot of people out there who are spreading this misinformation that it's not an actual disease, that there's, this is all made up. And that's really, really problematic, of course, because it's a real disease and a lot of
Yeah.
people have passed away from it.
Yeah.
And that's a really complicated narrative there. Because this is all still so new to us. And this is a perfect place, though, for folklore to come in and really be both a problem and a solution at the same time, right? So a lot of times when we don't have information, we fill in the gaps with the things that make sense to us, right? So that's why you're hearing like all this different information out there, and these ideas that make sense to people. They just sort of feel right. So it's so interesting to see that happening right now. Also, but awful at the same time, of course, because this is not where any of us want to be right now. So many of us are at
Yeah.
home, or we're being very, very careful. We're wearing masks. We're doing all these different things. But there's still so much fear out there that what are we, how can we be safe? How do we make the right choices for ourselves and for the people around us? Because it's not just about us, right? It's about everyone that surrounds us. And that contagion and contamination really, it can be a part of that. One of the chapters in the book I wrote is called The Kiss of Death, which is, right after the title. And it's all about kisses that kill people. And I went through this like very kind of old school folklore study where I collected all these stories and then started analyzing them. And the one thing I found in the stories that is if a loved one kissed you, you're pretty much gonna die. Like, that was like the worst part. And it's that whole idea where the person that you love and trust is actually the person who is contagious,
Right.
right? And that not knowing, and we're seeing that so much right now, of course, because we have asymptomatic carriers with COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and that's so scary to us because someone can look healthy and can
Yeah.
look okay. But yeah, and to us that is an absolutely terrifying thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even ties back to our concepts of the vampires and zombies come in there too, right? Because vampires and zombies look just like us,
Mm-hmm.
but they're different. They're fundamentally different, and they've changed, and they're contaminated and contagious, and they, all kinds of things are wrong with them, but they're still our loved ones. And and I think we're going to see more of that again, and I think in the future, our popular culture will probably see a little bit more of these contagion narratives,
Oh
and we're going to
yeah,
probably,
absolutely.
different
I
ways of
I
talking
think
about this.
the writers are home now writing their scripts
Yes,
for all this stuff.
right? We're going to end up with a lot of claustrophobic movies, I think, too.
Yeah,
We're all
yeah,
stuck at home.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, that's what we've experienced, right? And
Yeah,
this is giving us a way to talk about it, though, isn't it? And
it
again,
is.
this is
A couple of
it
things came to mind when you were mentioning this. Um, One is I if I do a group ghost hunt, um, there is at least one person, if not more, uh, who is so frightened about bringing something home with them.
yes, uh-huh.
Um, and that's not going to happen. You know,
Mhm.
that it's just not going to happen. And you had mentioned like the ignore it and it'll go away kind of, and sort of that's kind of a little bit of the advice that we give to people who feel that they are being oppressed by a haunting.
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
Ignore it and it will go away. And but we don't use those terms. We say, well, if you stop talking about it and go about your daily business and say, this is my house, my life, my space, you
Mhm.
don't belong here, you kind of take the power away from it. So it fits, but it's just a different way of saying ignore it and it will go away. Um,
Yeah.
and people think that they'll bring things home. It's like,
Yeah,
no,
not necessarily, right?
no. I,
It's
I mean, for all that I've done, would I say that I've brought some things home? I think that I have. I mean, I've had EVPs because I'll keep my tape recorder running, and I've had them as I'm pulling in my driveway. Nice place
Oh
you got
wow.
here. Yeah, I get. Uh,
Oh wow.
but it's really different for me because I'm there doing the investigation. To just attend, the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. But having said that, do I think that spirits might find someone interesting and say, "Oh, gee, she reminds me of someone," or "He reminds me of someone," or "Oh, this person does this. I wonder what the." So maybe they do go and look and check. But you know what? Maybe they go and look and check anyway. It's not
Yeah.
in a harmful way, and they're not going to bother you, and they'll leave. It's not huge. So that was
Yeah.
just interesting. That
And that you've probably heard this too, where a lot of people, more people are reporting now that they realize their houses are haunted now that they're staying home. So, which I thought that was so interesting because, you might not know. And some of them, of course, like probably are experiencing real things. And some people are just like, wow, my house makes a lot of noise. I didn't know it did that.
yeah,
So there's like varying levels of, not being home during the day. And I've even seen like jokes about where people are like making these jokes about like, how your ghost is probably sick of you being home too. And, you know,
go back to work, please. I need my space. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So
really
just like
disruptive.
people's pets are getting overwhelmed, their
Yeah,
ghosts are too.
yeah.
I love that idea, but it's funny too because I had like kind of put something up on social media about that, and one of my friends was like, "Let's." If also people are just becoming more aware of their houses, like they might not have been aware of the if you believe your house has a sort of its own um, consciousness or its own sort of energy that you like maybe you just weren't even aware of before that. And I think we talk about a lot of inanimate objects in those different ways, and we talk about like we give different things genders. We talk about them and in different ways. I remember so we recently bought a house, and of course the first thing I was worried about is like, is this like, is my house haunted? I need to know. And it was funny because I kept asking people and no one would answer me. Like,
Right. Sure sign. Sure sign.
yeah, and it was like, this is suspicious.
Yeah.
But I
Hmm.
remember even like I started to notice just the words we use. Because my husband and I started making jokes about like how people always talk about how houses have good bones, and I was like, that's like a hilarious kind of thing to say. But then like we were also talking about the house breathing. I remember at one point I saw some cracks in the attic, I was like, oh, I can see daylight. Is that like we probably have to patch those up? And they're like, no, 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 the house needs to breathe. And I was just like, wow, that's interesting how we're talking about the house in these terms. Is a living, breathing entity that needs to breathe. It has bones. It has all these different things, and it's interesting how we talk about some things in our lives that we would not consider. Someone's like, oh, is your house alive? You'd say, no, of course it's not. But it is, because we talk about it in
Absolutely.
those terms
Yeah.
too. So it's interesting I wonder how many people are out there realizing like, oh, my house has a
Oh.
life of its own that's doing its own thing, like I have a ghost, and it's hopefully an entity that they can live with.
Yeah, I'll tell you. As far as like ghost hunting in houses, I don't do a huge amount of it. I do it, but I don't do a lot of it. Um, Mostly because the places that interest me are more historical sites, or I kind of just get a feel for it, and I got that's the place. That's the place. Houses are really different, and a lot of times it's confidentiality. And I'm kind of really more into the evidence and things like that. And I use dowsing rods, and if someone is a little scared of having something in their house and then they see the dowsing rods work, they become even more scared. Like it doesn't really work. But having said that, the houses that I want to investigate are the ones where the people don't want you to do it, because they're the ones who are content with the spirits and the beings, and they're like, I've had countless number of people say to me, yeah, maybe you could. Well, wait, suppose the ghost didn't like the fact that you came in and it sort of disrupted them, then I'd have problems. So we're like, I think I better leave well enough alone.
Yeah. Right? That is kind of always the like, maybe I should just leave it be and, live
Which
and let
is,
live, or
yeah, yeah.
sort of.
And I actually, I just from research, I think it's realestate.com says that, according to one of their recent surveys, 30% of people would like to live in haunted houses. So that was
Yeah.
interesting.
And it's really interesting. And it's and I mentioned, an article to you too, where they were talking about what makes a haunted house a good thing. And sometimes it's just the way you find out. So if you like find out by living there, or you find out by someone telling you stories about it, that's usually a much more positive thing than finding out because you're on a ghost tour, right? Or finding out that like there was a murder in your house
Yeah,
and no one
yeah,
told you. Like that's
yeah.
the bad way to find out, right? But
That's yeah.
to have like little things happen and things move
Yeah.
around, like that's like the better way to find out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I mean, and especially like if you look at ghost tourism, my gosh, there are people that will spend money to stay. They'll spend more money to stay in the haunted room versus the not haunted room, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's like, I think that's so many people wanting to have an experience like with the supernatural, because either because they haven't had one, and they're kind of like jealous that they haven't had one. And it's funny because I do, speaking of the contagious and contaminated thing, a lot of times when my students take my class, a lot of them will have supernatural experiences throughout the course of the class. And so some of them have never had one before, and some of them will, and they're excited about it. And sometimes it still just doesn't happen for them. But I remember I had one student who had, and I kind of warned them when we talk about sleep paralysis, it can happen too. The acknowledgement of it, the studying it, just having it, in your head is something that can happen, can also make it happen. Plus, we're in high stress environments. People tend to have sleep paralysis, or people are not getting enough sleep and are very, very tired, which of course that says university all over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've had students who have had no experiences, and then they have one, and they're kind of like, I wish this would have never happened to me. Now that I've actually had the experience, it's scary, and I don't want it to happen again. I very rarely have students who are like, I had an experience and I'm excited and I wanted to do it again. Like some of them will
Yeah.
have like a sort of, they'll have an experience and be like, okay, this is what it is now, and it's sort of an acceptance of it. But I very rarely have anybody that's like, yay, I had an experience and it was terrifying and I'm very excited about it.
People talk about sleep paralysis, and they say it is frightening. It's one of the most frightening experiences they've ever had. They're
Yes, it is.
traumatized by it.
And I've actually had sleep paralysis, and
It-
it is scary. It's scary to have. The first time I had it, I was in grad school. I was actually reading up on it, and I remember our professor had even kind of warned us, like, you might have this, while we're reading about it. So just so you know, and I was actually very aware of it before I had done any research on it, or I had even read anything on it, because my mom had it when I was a kid. And so I
oh,
was used to her having it, her telling me her experiences with it. So I'd known about it. So I was actually pretty excited because we had different words for it, but it was, to find out that people had studied it was really exciting to me. But I had never had it myself. And I remember that, like, when I had it really, really well, because I was in grad school. It was like towards the end of the semester. I was really tired. So it was like all the classic, signs that I was going to have it. And I come home from classes like late in the afternoon. And I decided to lay down just for a second. And I'm not somebody that naps. I never nap. I'm just not good. I just can't nap for some reason. So it was one of those things where I just lay down on the bed just for a second, and I must have fallen asleep. And I had woken up very much aware that I was awake. I knew I was awake. I could see, out the window, I could see the trees and the leaves moving on the trees, the sunlight, and I was very aware of everything in the room. But I was also very aware that sort of in my doorway, which was kind of behind me, something was standing in the doorway. And I cannot say it in any other way. Like that there was, to this day, something was standing in the doorway. I don't know what was standing in the doorway. I couldn't move my head to see what was standing in the doorway, but I very much had the presence that something was standing in my doorway, and I lived alone. And that was terrifying. Because I was, and during the whole thing, I was like, what is it? Is it a person in my house? Is it something else in my house? I had no idea, because it just was that feeling of something standing there. And then, of course, as most sleep paralysis experiences happen, it went away. I was able to start moving, and I looked, and there was nothing there.
Right.
But I remember sitting there thinking, like, okay, like, I've had sleep paralysis. I've been reading about this. I know exactly what this is. And I'm like, this was sort of my way of kind of thinking about it. I started like, okay, I've had like 4 out of the 7 common experiences I started kind of nerding out about it. That was one way of kind of processing and dealing with it. But yeah, it was so interesting because I had not had at least a sleep paralysis experience ever before. And I was like, wow, this is scary. This is very, very scary. To the point where I sometimes am still, to this day, I've had other sleep paralysis experiences too, but I'm like, oh, I better not sleep on my back. I better do things to try to prevent this from happening, because I don't want it to happen again, because it does have there is that element of fear in it that is very common. Most people actually even describe it as feeling like they're going to die.
Oh,
which,
goodness.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So it is such a scary, different experience that when you have it, you don't really want to have it again. No one's excited about having it a second or third or fourth time.
No.
And for some people, it is common. Like, they have it frequently. I've been lucky enough to only have it a few times, but yeah, it is. It's a very intense experience.
It sounds it. I have never had it, so I'm glad. I'm glad I have it.
Yeah, definitely be glad. It is not a good. It doesn't feel good.
No. So, thank you, Dr. Kitta. It's been wonderful talking with you, and I really encourage everyone to read your book and check out your work on Google Scholars. If you just have to search Andrea Kitta. But where can they download your book?
So my publisher actually has it up right now. It's Utah State University Press. So if you go to their website, you can find it and you can download the whole book for free.
Wow. Okay, that's great. So I encourage everyone to do it, and I'll find the link, and I'll put it on Twitter, and I'll attach it to the video. So that's really wonderful. And again, if people have questions, I will forward them to you. I'll do it through Twitter and online, and maybe we could do it again, and you could give some answers to those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. So thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate this wonderful interview. I know everyone's going to love it.
Oh, thank you. I had fun talking to you too.
Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Okay, you too. Take care.